We are called to order, and since I didn't plan in advance, Neil, would you do the invocation?
Sure. Let's pray. Father, thank you so much for this day that you have given us. Thank you for all the blessings that you give our city, and thank you for the people who serve our city, the city employees, the job that they do. We're so thankful that we have such a group that does such an outstanding job. I just ask that you continue to bless our city and protect us. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Please join me in the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So that wasn't on the agenda. We just were so automatic.
Wing it.
Okay. Public input and unscheduled personal appearances. We got that slide tonight. Is there anyone in the audience that wants to address this body about any of the agenda items? There being none. Item number 4, update on automatic meter infrastructure. Tyler Klein. Tyler's the only one that could wear that shirt and pull it off.
Thank you.
I like it. I just don't think I could pull it off.
Thank you very much. Tonight we're going to do kind of an update on the fiber to the home AMI automatic or advanced metering infrastructure. Just kind of give people a background on this. The fiber optic technology is unique because it carries large amounts of information, which we refer to as bandwidth, over long distances, and then it's transmitted by light, so pulses of light. And then the AMI, this is refers to a system that measures, collects, and analyzes energy usage from advanced devices such as electric meters, water meters. They even have them on gas meters now. And it's a two-way communication. So some people talk about AMR. AMI is more advanced. AMI has two-way communication.
So R is just the reading. The I is the back and forth, basically.
Yes, sir.
It's a conversation.
That's kind of how we've had it explained to us, the differences. And the goal of the AMI is to provide utility companies with real-time data about power, water consumption, and allow customers to make informed choices. And we've been to a couple different presentations on this, and a lot of people that do it. For example, I went to a presentation that PSO had, and they were talking about it, and they said a lot of citizens enjoyed it because you could get up to date. You could click on it, which I'll show on a couple slides, and actually see your energy usage or your water usage for that day to kind of estimate your bill. Benefits of AMI, you have remote connect, disconnect. So instead of sending the electric guy out to reinstall the meter, you just click a button and the electric will be turned back on. So you'd be saving money there. Also, you can do it for the water meters. That's a water meter right there. Water leaks are caught earlier. We have a lot of water leaks, as everybody's seen, especially for this time of year. So you can allow them to catch it earlier. Also, we have a lot of older homes, so they have a lot of leaks. People don't realize that till a month later, so they have huge utility bills. So with this system, our thought would be that somehow we'd have it set up where if they had a different reading than normal, then we'd have some alert sent to us, then we could actually call that homeowner, that renter, and say, hey, your usage for today is a lot higher. You should check out your water to see if there's some issue, your electric.
Because you prompted me, Amber, I want to talk about this process of notification later, okay, where we're mailing a letter. I want to see if we can do something to improve that process. We'll come back to that. Go ahead.
Also, there was a lot of talks about people for the CSRs from talking to different cities that have this and organizations. Somebody might call and say, I don't realize how my electric bill is so high, or I don't use that much water. And then they look on there and they say, well, are you, like the joke was, one guy said, are you an early riser? And the lady was like, yes, I am. And he's like, well, I can see that you take a shower, it looks like every morning at 5 o'clock, because your water usage for that day is high at 5 o'clock. So, that, and you use this many gallons of water at 5. So it was kind of, it opened their eyes to how much water they used or electric. So it's kind of an interesting deal just to help explain stuff to customers better. Also, you can spot theft, tampers, and mismetering by recognizing abnormalities, and prevent backflow, bypasses, and then if there's not a constant flow, then we can realize that we have something possibly on our end going wrong. We've had a lot of calls about I don't have water in my house because the weather's so cold. We send somebody out there to look, and we have water going to the meter, and the water is going to the meter, not through the meter, but then their house is frozen up. So,
And so how does it detect that?
You could look at the meters that are next to the area that they call about and see if they're being used. If there's water usage going right there, so then you could pinpoint.
Okay.
This is just an example I pulled off the internet for how some places they do it. So you could go to the website and you could say, okay, you can see it's kind of hard to read, but it's separated by days, and then you can see your electric reading by day and by time. The next slide has water, so you can kind of see this is a single day. So they broke it up, and you can see how much water they use for 24 hours.
So you're saying that in theory we could have this available on the website for me to go and check my own usage?
Yes, sir. From talking to, for example, I believe it was a gentleman from PSO, he said the problem that they have now is that people watch this website continuously and then they'll prepay, but then they realize, okay, I have 12 days till shut off. Well, when their power goes out the 12th day, then they call and say, hey, here's my credit card number, turn my power back on. Because they realize they can do it from a push of a button. They don't have to send somebody out the next day. So that was his, he kind of joked, but he said that was kind of his complaint about the system, was that people realized it was so quick.
They don't have a charge for reconnecting?
They do, but he said that was one thing they were looking at, increasing their charge because people were taking advantage of it. A good thing too they brought up was that, okay, if you're on a tight budget, then in the wintertime you could prepay your bill. So you could say, okay, my bill is going to be higher this month just from watching this daily. You could get your daily read, and then you could start prepaying weekly or however you want to do it. There's a bunch of different ways they had it set up just to kind of help people out. Different options with AMI. A lot of people say, how could we do this? We could have a company come down and provide these services. Obviously, we bid this all out, but we'd have a company. There's many different companies that do this. We could do a request for proposal, which seems to be getting more and more popular in Oklahoma. I have 2 cases of this. Then construction management at risk. This is similar to how the NEO project was ran. So the contractor has pretty much all the responsibility. And then also the city run the project. So kind of different ways we could implement this. Next slide,
We had a
please.
couple of proposals a while back, didn't we? I mean, they were real fine-tuned proposals, but they were...
I'm sorry, my phone is just going absolutely bonkers. Let me turn it off. My apologies.
That's
Your
I
Honor.
wanted to go to the next slide.
Okay, so the first one we talked about, the company provide the service. This is just, you can do an internet Google search. There's all kinds of different companies that provide these services. This is just, from today I did a Google search, and these are the different companies that I came up with that do this kind of work.
And you mean a turnkey program?
Yes, sir.
From each
Yes,
of
sir.
these companies? Okay.
Next slide, please. The second one, the request for proposals. This is what I talked about. It seems to be getting more and more popular in Oklahoma. We talked to Claremore, and also on the next one, we have I believe I can't remember, it's SkyTook, I believe. But the city issues an RFP for the AMI system for water and electric meters. Claremore just did this. They got their proposals back. They had 3 or 4 companies submit proposals. They selected GE. So they contracted with GE for 10 years. The cost is $3.99 per meter is what they're charged. So GE pays for all the infrastructure, all the meters, everything. They just charge $3.99 per meter. And you have to think we have 2 meters for each household because we have a water meter and an electric meter. So, and then with kind of doing the numbers, with 17,000 meters that they have, the total comes to the amount of about $8.5 million over the 10 years.
So it's $3.99 per month per meter,
Yep.
$8 a month
Yes,
per
sir.
house.
Tyler, just for clarification, that's a wireless-based system?
Yes.
That's wireless, so you're not getting the fiber,
No, you're just
you're not getting a
doing
fiber
wireless.
network. In addition to that, you're just getting the meters.
Yes, sir. And they even talked about the water, for example, the water meters. They talked about you could set the time for how often it's read, every 15 minutes, every 30 minutes, every hour. Just kind of dependent.
Any idea why or if they looked at the fiber option?
We really haven't got that far. They just, I think they just wanted a turnkey where they weren't involved with it. I believe just from reading the newspaper, they've had some issues with other projects, so they just wanted
Okay.
something to go smooth. The second one was SkyTook, like I said. They just recently contracted with GE. This was in the Tulsa world. Their cost is $4.99 per meter, and they broke it down to approximately $32,000 per month. And it's the same setup as.
And why the dollar difference in cost?
Because the number of meters is what we were told. They have fewer meters, so. The construction management at risk, for this we'd have a consultant design our system, then we would bid the system out to be installed, and then we have a contractor that managed it similar to the NEO project. And then, obviously it's less risk for the city because the contractor is responsible for everything. The city just is there to oversee it if there's any problems. City manages the project, the same thing. Firm designs the system and the meters. Contractors are hired to install the meters. Obviously there's less cost this way, but there's a lot more responsibility and a lot more headaches. And there's more risk to the city.
Okay, so, but the key difference between the last two, whether we use the construction manager at risk CMAR process or this process and the others, is this includes fiber. We're running fiber to
Yes,
all
sir.
the homes.
Yes, sir. We would have an engineering firm come in, design all
For
the
the
fiber
wireless.
network, the wireless meters and everything, and then have a higher construction management at risk.
So what does the fiber run to? Just the water meter, and then the wireless, the electric is wireless? Is that how you?
Actually, sir, it'd be the other way around. The fiber would go to the electric meter, which is usually attached to the house.
Okay.
And then the water meter would be wireless to the electric meter.
And then the fiber to the home. So this is kind of going back to the fiber to the home. So this consists of installing fiber to area homes and businesses. If you remember the ACRS, they presented the study that they did about doing the fiber to the homes and the meters and everything. They kind of talked about what they proposed is a hybrid system in which the AMI could be used off of the fiber system. So you'd have the fiber system constructed around the city, and then you'd have the meters. You'd have a collector, and then the collectors would remote with the meters, so then we'd get information back and forth that way.
So you get all the benefits that you talked about earlier of the readers.
Yes, sir.
Just be using the fiber to communicate it instead.
Yes, sir.
And
And
then
then another interesting way, and we went to Salisol and talked to them about this, is on the next slide. With the fiber, so this kind of explains how the fiber works. So you have your box there located on the house, and then you could have, with the fiber, you could have phone, internet, video, which we'll talk about in a second in a little more detail. So the hybrid fiber wireless system, so it utilizes, like I said, the technology. This way they have a drop wire coming into the actual electric meter, and then the water meter would be wireless. Also with having fiber to the home, you could have, like I said, you could have video, internet, telephone service. We went to Salisol. They provide this for their citizens. They provide internet, cable, and telephone through their fiber system. They do not have the AMI for their meters yet, but they would like to. They just said that they have funding issues with doing that right now, but that is definitely what they're looking at going. This is just talking about fibers in Salisol. The system is called DiamondNet. Like I said, they offer television, internet, and telephone. They launched in May 2005 with 97 customers. I believe right now they have, I can't remember the exact number. Do you remember, Mr. Bishop, from our meeting? But their gross revenue of around $206,000 per month with 2,000 customers. They currently supplement this system with $15,000 a month after paying off their bond and all their expenses. They supplement it with $15,000. They just recently renegotiated their TV contract, and also they renegotiated their telephone contract. So they were thinking this year they're going to break even for the services. And this is their 7th year in design or in completion. So. Like I said, they've selected new carriers, so they anticipated cutting about $175,000 per year in cost. The services they offer, they have 268 video channels, with 40 of these being HD channels, and they were looking at, with their new package, having more HD channels. And then their different internet tier services. And then here's the fiber to the home. This is the cities right now that are currently doing fiber to the home. If you read the Joplin Gove on Sunday, they talked about having, Carl Junction was currently in the process of going out for funding. There was an article in there for fiber to the home system. Different service options. Like I said, we could have phone. We could do that, retail versus wholesale. So we could be in control of the phone ourselves, or we could have somebody else run the phone system for us. They could just pay us a fee. Internet, the same thing. We could have resale versus wholesale. And then video. City operates and maintains the system. So like I said, Southside, they operate their own system, which was neat. They run everything. And then they have wholesale. So we could talk with somebody like RecTech, different companies like that provide this service for us. They just pay us a fee for using our fiber.
And these are all customer choice
Yes, sir.
utilities. These are not utilities that are mandated that they take, like the electric and water. I mean, there wouldn't be an ordinance, you have to have a phone, you have to have, I mean, these are just basically optional utilities that we provided to customers.
But you have to run the infrastructure for everyone, whether they take it or not. It's
Yeah, the intent behind fiber to the home in this particular situation is that unlike Salisal, where it was driven by creating access to these types of utilities, ours is driven by AMI, and oh, by the way, we get this as an added benefit. And that's one of the things that we want to tee up for discussion tonight is this concept of retail versus wholesale and different options available, and how we should go forward in packaging this in the future.
Would you say that our current cable arrangement is analogous to what you're describing as the wholesale option? I mean, we get a franchise fee off of cable, and
You know, this would be a little bit different in the sense that this would be more of a landlord type arrangement where we would literally lease the bandwidth to somebody else. There wouldn't be a franchise fee, but we would in essence be getting a rental income of some sort.
Whereas under the current agreement, Cable One, for example, leases the contractual right to install lines, cables, and hardware within our easements.
So in this case, we would actually be selling the right to use our excess bandwidth.
On our infrastructure.
excess over and above what we're using for the AMI.
Yes, which would be minor compared to what the capacity of fiber is. And I'm going to spend a few minutes with you talking about what's going on around us just outside our corporate limits and what the differences are going to be regarding the availability of services to those in the country, so to speak, compared to what's available in the city. And I think that's a significant factor for you to consider.
Just different costs we talked about. If you guys remember from the ACRS study, they talked about 14.25 million. This is having drops at each home for the electric meter. So if you went this route, then you'd already have the fiber to the home. So it'd just be a matter of installing the box. If we went to the hybrid system with the collectors and everything being wireless, then we would have to pay to have the drop to the home if they wanted the video, internet, or telephone services. So with their own forces, they came up with a figure of 10.2 million. Financing options. There's rural utility services that have loans for broadband programs. There's also, we've been talking back and forth to the bonding company. You can kind of see there the payments yearly if we borrow the 14 million for 20 years versus if we borrow the 14 million for 15 years.
Now, the revenue source for this would be a combination of three things. One, the rental income that we would receive from either providing retail services or wholesale services on the bandwidth. The cost savings from no longer having to read meters, and then also then from revenues inside the system. Now, this is a
What does that last one mean?
Yeah, I'm getting ready to explain it,
Okay.
sir. And this is this is one of the surprising wrinkles that this creates. A meter theoretically only reads accurate in the favor of the city on the day that it's put into service. Every day thereafter, the meter reads a little less accurate to the benefit of the customer. Okay? For example, inside a water meter, there's a device that turns when the water goes past it. And over time, especially in our situation where we have such hard water, calcium builds up in that and slows it down. And not so much so in electric meters, but even to a certain degree, electric meter will eventually, I mean, it's got mechanical parts in it and it could get lubrication issues and so on and so forth. So when you go in and wholesalely replace all of the meters, then all the meters are going to read more accurate than they have in the past. Now, before we start getting massive posts on Facebook, so let me qualify this one more time. I want to make sure I'm very clear about this. The meters don't read accurately to the benefit of the customer, not to the city. The meters will not overread. They have to actually have something go through them to make them work. But they don't work as good when they get older as they did when they were newer. So theoretically, when you implement new meters, you recapture a lot of services that you haven't been charging for. So when we say that there's enhanced revenue from this, it's because you've basically, in certain situations, are, I guess, a way of saying is you're leaving money on the table, account to account, depending on how efficient that meter is in reading it. So, for example, I noticed that Mr. Willis walked in from Noresco. That's one of the pitches that they made when they made their presentation to you is that they promise and guarantee that there's enough savings in their program to pay for the cost.
Sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I'm confused. So that's the third element. And then there's also capacity in our finances due to some of the restructuring that we've done that would accommodate both other capital improvements that we're going to talk about in the future and then also implementing this system. So the intent behind the feasibility study was to determine whether or not there were enough savings plus potential new rental income to cash flow this improvement. And the conclusion was that as long as we're not factoring in depreciation, which is a private sector tax remedy, most of the system, our expectation is that the lifespan that we'll get out of implementing the system far exceeds a normal depreciation schedule, is that it basically would pay for itself. So there wouldn't be a proposed rate increase because of this. There is, just like in any type of a business arrangement, we're going to have what is the word I'm looking for? Markers,
Benchmarks?
not benchmarks, points in time, milestones where we're going to have to bring certain information to bear so that we can continue to make these decisions. In other words, we probably would have a decision to make as to whether or not we're going to get involved in the retail decision versus wholesale. Each one of those is going to involve certain negotiations with entities. In the retail side, it would be providers. On the wholesale side, it would be customers. So in other words, if we were going to try and take the wholesale approach, we're going to have to negotiate an agreement with somebody. We've already had some individuals, some entities that have reached out to us and are interested in having those business discussions on the wholesale side, simply based on the comments that they've read in media where we've discussed this. And that in itself is a whole process that requires a number of decisions that need to be made. So when we look at these financing options, there are a number of vehicles that can be used, including revenue bonds. We are at historic low rates. Had you chose to do this 5 years ago, the cost would have been probably 3 times higher than it is now, and your financing costs would have been equally as high. So we're seeing a very good time. Technology costs are coming down. I think one of the comments we got from Salisaw is remarkable how much it's gone down since they did their project. So the benefits of decreases in cost and quite frankly, now we're talking about bandwidth capable of going up to 10 gigabytes to your home compared to the 20 megabytes maximum that they're providing in Salisaw. So megabytes is million bits and gigabytes are trillions?
Billions.
Is it billions?
Yeah.
It's billions of bits.
1,000 meg.
Yeah, so it's 1,000 meg. 1 gigabyte's 1,000 meg. So that's a traumatic improvement in bandwidth. this becomes an economic development issue as we're competing with other communities. And unfortunately for our case, we may be competing with the rural areas of the community that are served by REC when they put in their project, because their intent is to start providing 1 gigabyte of internet and video service to the rural areas and around Miami. They're prohibited from doing it inside Miami. So you could have, currently my understanding is that the highest capacity bandwidth we can get inside the city limits of Miami at present is 70 megabytes, and that's provided by Cable One. So 70 megabytes compared to 1 gigabyte, which is 1,000 megabytes, is a considerable difference in bandwidth.
Jeff, when we talk about bandwidth, well, I'll use Sallisaw as an example. They're at 20 meg. I mean, is that, they can't turn the power up any higher, you put in a certain size
Yeah.
filament and that's all you can do, or what drives that capacity?
You know, when you refer to bandwidth in the industry, they call it pipe. You know, if you've got a fat pipe, but just like with a normal pipe, your capacity and your efficiency is limited by your weakest link. And I believe in Sallisaw it was their head end.
Yes, sir. And they're getting ready to get a new head in.
And the head end is where their restriction was, because the fiber itself is generally got much more capacity than what you actually provide, because it's the connectors and it's the head end equipment that limit that.
So when they upgrade, they're not having to go and lay new wire everywhere, they're just changing
Their head end.
calling
Yes, sir.
the head end.
And there is a difference. My understanding, there is a difference between fiber that you buy today and fiber that you bought,
10 years ago.
10 years ago. Excuse me?
It's the life. Depends on how you like it.
Right. It's really more about what you're putting into that cable, from what we've been able to do
But
from the research.
I'm just asking a question because you're talking about 1 gig and you're talking about how fast technology is advancing and decreasing in cost. If 5 years from now we had the ability to provide 5 gig, we wouldn't have to rewire everything.
Right. My understanding is that the configuration that we've been considering is easily upgradable from 1 to 10 gigabytes.
Okay.
But then again, I remember the very first time I bought a server that had a gigabyte hard drive, and we thought, wow, we'll never fill that up. And now programs themselves are 8 to 9 gigabytes. So technology is a very difficult thing to estimate.
I mean, the last slide is the next step. We've been in discussions with another firm that does these kind of studies to possibly have them also do a study to see if their financial figures come out the same. This firm, they're more into the retail wholesale of video, cable, and telephones. This is kind of their specialty, so we could look at it. Could we cash flow this yearly?
This is Sallisaw's control center, is that right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Each one of these little boxes that you see in this rack that's in this picture is a TV station. And each one of those was $5,000 a piece. So, and there are 3 or 4 of these racks next. And there's racks where they had other units that they'd had for years earlier that were no longer usable, because they were constantly having to update these boxes to accommodate changes with the different TV providers, going from analog to digital, and then from digital to high definition. And I guess I'm assuming that there's one that's 3D if you're broadcasting something in 3D. So one of the big discussions that we need to have is whether or not we want to entertain the possibility of getting into the retail business, or whether we are more comfortable doing the wholesale. Based on my observations, and this is a big dialogue that's going on in between staff, and maybe it might be a generational thing, but I'm much more comfortable in the wholesale line of it rather than getting into the retail, because when you compare our experience in offering retail services, which we do in electric, water, and wastewater, sanitation, and so on and so forth, there are unique customer service challenges. And I think it's fair to say that municipalities have maybe a little bit more of a unique situation in those areas than do private sector. So I also know that if you lose your water and you're at work, it's not as big a concern as it is if you lose your water while you're cooking the evening meal or you're taking your shower before you go to work. And I know that if you lose your television feed during the Oklahoma State game, it would just be magnified even larger. So I'm a little bit shy when it comes to considering getting into the retail business. However, to be fair about that, there's more money to be generated from an entrepreneurial standpoint when you're engaged in the retail end of it than when you are in the wholesale. The other problem with considering retail versus wholesale is that we will get criticism that we are unfairly competing with the private sector on the retail side. On the wholesale side, that's pretty much an opportunity for you to bid that. You can open up those discussions to whomever and look at what the best opportunity and the best deal is for the ratepayers. Again, we have wanted to focus on our interest here being twofold. One, to implement the AMI, and I'll visit about why we think AMI is such a good thing for Miami here in just a second, which I think is a very timely conversation given the experiences that we had over this past weekend. And the other was to provide our residents an opportunity to remain competitive with the bandwidth options that are available with other communities that are in our neighborhood, and very soon with the options that are available to residents that do not live within the corporate limits of the city. So let's talk about AMI. Okay. It's probably no secret that we had a fairly heavy traffic on Facebook over the weekend regarding utility bills that went out this month in comparison to the bills that went out the month before. My bill at my home doubled between November and December. And there were a lot of factors that went into that. And I want to kind of talk about those and then relate those all back to what AMI does for us in that particular situation. First of all, December was a brutally cold month compared to past Decembers. Last December was very mild. The city had consumption with GRDA that was about 2.5 million kilowatts more than the previous month. So there was more consumption of power, period.
Can you express that as a percentage, Jeff? I mean, that means nothing to me.
13 million in November and 16 million
Okay,
in,
so 20%.
yeah,
or
and,
so.
and when you factor out your industrial loads, which probably were not as affected by the temperature
Right.
change as much as, the business of providing the service that they provide, then there is a significant increase in the amount of consumption. And that's not even factoring in the demand charges and so on and so forth. Okay. So there was that factor. There also was the fact that there were 5 weeks in some of the circuits. We bill in circuits. We call that something else. Cycles. We bill in cycles. So some of the cycles that got billed last month included 5 weeks of usage as opposed to the normal 4 weeks that we see. And that happens routinely, just like with paydays here, getting paid every 2 weeks. Some months you get paid 3 times, sometimes, usually it's just 2 times. We've even sadly discovered that in a very rare occasion, we have more than 26 pay periods in a year. Just the way the calendar does, it's possible to run into a year where you get 27. Well, December happened to be one of those times when we actually had some of the cycles with 5 weeks. There were also rumors that there was a meter reader that was caught reading meters wrong. We don't have an official statement on the fact of whether or not they were reading wrong, but we can say that since we have contracted with the company that we're contracting with, we've had two basic routes, and we've had one person reading one route the whole time that we've been contracted with them. But the other route has gone through quite a bit of churn. There have been over 9 readers on that route over the history of this contract. So there has been quite a bit of turnover, and each time someone new is trained, we will have little hiccups along that process. But no one is charged more than they use. When a meter is read wrong, it's read right at some point. And at that point in time, things even out. But what you can have in those situations, and just because there's a contract firm doing it doesn't mean that other communities that are using employees don't have the same problems, because I've had those problems before. It happens. Numbers get transposed. There's data entry errors. It happens. That cycled out sometime earlier. So the irony is that it didn't, the individual that may or may not have had problems didn't read the entire community. They only read certain routes. So it wouldn't have been a uniform problem throughout the community. And we're seeing comments and concerns from customers that are all across the community. We also are seeing concerns about some of the private utilities having doubling effects. I mean, even my gas bill at my home doubled between November and December. So those factors add to it. AMI provides us with instantaneous readings. We can have them at our fingertips instantaneous. The computer can be programmed to alert us, and I'm assuming the customer as well, when they have an anomalous reading. So no one is going out and reading the meter is reading itself. So no matter how bad the weather is, no matter who's involved in it, the meter is reading itself. We still will go out and do spot reads, because I'm sure at times there's going to be people who are going to assume that the computer read it wrong. So we'll still have that availability. We have that availability now. We have somebody that goes out and does rereads from time to time. Our biggest financial impact is in the fact when, especially you've seen all of these requests we've had from customers for adjudicating their bills because of leaks. When we look at our accounts receivable, and we're running a little bit over $1 million in uncollectible accounts at this point in time. I would like to point out that the cost associated with 1 year's debt service is $1 million. We have a 30-day lag, sometimes a 60-day lag, before we can figure out with the manual reading system that there's a leak going on at the property. The computer would know immediately. The customer could monitor it daily. From what I've read and heard, it's surprising how many people actually get on there and actually monitor it. I've had people that tell me they go out and read their meters daily and monitor how fast the wheel is turning. And if it's acting weird, then they know they can do something about it. But most of us don't have the time or the initiative to get out and do those types of things. Well, this allows, the system is very user-friendly. You can monitor it yourself, so you can catch it when if you're a landlord, you also can find out if you've got a potential problem happening. But what we find is that we get people that have these leaks, and then their bills skyrocket to the point where no normal person can pay it. And they don't come in and ask for adjudication. They just basically abandon the account. And then we're left holding that large balance. This gives us the option to monitor those things more closely. So I think confidence rises considerably in how accurate the information is that's flowing back into the city, because you can monitor it yourself. I have a number of credit cards that I can program to send me emails when something happens with my account. I'm going to assume that we're going to have that option with the software, that we can, you can customize it to send you notices that all of a sudden you've got this problem. Some internet providers can provide you with that same notification that you're exceeding your bandwidth limit, so on and so forth. So there's a lot of flexibility that's available to the customer that would alleviate a lot of concerns that we have now, whether they're right or wrong regarding whether or not the meter reading process. I think the thing that I want to make sure that I touch on here most certainly is that the city has a equalization option available for our customers. Everyone knows that in June, July, and August, we're going to have higher electric usage because of air conditioning, if you're one of those people that likes to run an air conditioner. And for years, the city has provided what's called the level pay option to take the sting out of those high usage months. And basically, the computer looks at 12 months of your usage and averages your bill based on that. And each month, it changes that average based on the last 12 months usage, and it moves. So let's say you find yourself with a very large bill because either it was cold or it was hot, because maybe your bill was a lot lower than it normally is the month before because the reader either estimated it or made a mistake, and the next month is high. City staff has the authority to put you on a level pay system that takes the sting out of those large bills. So all you got to do is come to the customer service counter or call the city's number and get signed up for that. In the past, the policy has been that your account has to be current to do that. Given some of these extraordinary perceptions regarding the way these services have been delivered lately, we've been waiving that requirement. We now have the ability for the computer to even incorporate your past due into that. So if you're behind and you're worried that your service is going to cut off, I encourage you to contact the city and work out arrangements for you to get this service. I'm confident that no one has been overbilled. The system corrects itself eventually. I mean, at some point in time, you get an accurate reading, even if there was a mistake made. So it's not a question of being overbilled, it's a question of when you were billed. And I know how I am myself. Last month, when my bill was a little bit lower than it should have been, based on what my expectations were, I didn't go out of my way to ask, why is my bill so low? I certainly know that I was concerned when my bill was too high and wanted to ask these questions. So we certainly understand that people, when their bills were lower than they expected, may not have had that same motivation to look into things at that time. So this option is available. I think, the mayor and I were having a conversation in his house. He saves considerable money going on the level pay because you basically are going to get a predictable payment month in and month out. We would encourage everyone to do that. That option is still available with AMI. And as Tyler indicated, they can even get to the point where you can pay in advance and you can actually monitor what your needs are going to be on your account. So tonight, what we were hoping that we could get from the council is basically just some of your feelings and thoughts at this present time about two major issues. One is, under what process do you want to explore further the option of getting an AMI system and installing it? And two, whether or not you want to run down a track of exploring what the retail options are versus the wholesale option. So if we can go back and recap, the options basically were the old traditional route. We hire someone to design it, we put it out for bid, and we have it constructed just like we would a normal construction project. The other is that we go out with an RFP and ask a company to propose some type of an operating structure. You've had presentations from other firms in the past, from what they referred to, like for example, when Resco came in, And in their instances, they propose a proposal to you where they come in and guarantee you so much savings and provide you with financing options and stuff. It's kind of a turnkey approach. The other is sort of like a lease type operation, similar to what Claremore or SkyTook has done, where they put it out to bid and they get proposals from companies that will charge you a fee per meter per month to implement it. The other option is to use the construction manager at risk. It's kind of a turnkey approach where you hire someone who's done this before to run your system. Now, over the past year, I have shared with you news articles as I find them about what I refer to as the wrong way to do this. And there are cases of this all over the internet where communities have attempted to do this in different forms and have had nothing but problems. And we've learned from those mistakes. And one of the options that has been very successful in the construction of the Red Robinson Event Center is the use of the construction manager at risk, where you go out and you retain experts who've done this time in and time again to do that type of a project, who could come in and actually manage this project for you so that you're not actually, as a municipal organization, attempting to do this. And then the final option is just that option, is for the city to do it. And bluntly, I will recommend to you wholeheartedly that we not pursue that. I have not seen any implementation of one of these type projects where the city has done it themselves that has worked out well. They take time, you don't have the expertise, and it's just fraught with peril, and I would discourage that. But in the event that you want to explore it, we will come back with more information. And then the next major issue then is to consider whether you want to look at analyzing retail options or whether you want to look at wholesale options. There is one other option, and that's to not do the fiber at all. And that's to look at just doing a AMI system based on a wireless infrastructure, where we're not involved in providing any of the fiber to the home in that particular scenario.
Do we know what Cable One's plans are for fiber?
Cable One is implementing fiber throughout the community. They've been doing it certain neighborhoods. Michael and I were driving around the other day, and he was showing me where the fiber was that they've been installing. I don't know what their long-term plans are for rolling that out.
Well, I think that I'm glad to hear that they're pursuing it, and whether we do or not. We always talk about economic development and attracting people to our community and quality of life. And I think I see this kind of like cable. If we didn't have access to cable at all, if all you had was whatever stations your antenna gets, I don't think Miami would be a very attractive community to a lot of people. And I think the same thing applies to fiber. I mean, there's going to come a point where it's just an expected basic, and if you don't have it, you're not going to attract even residents, much less businesses. So I think that we have to make sure, whether it be Cable One or ourselves, however, that we are building towards providing that higher level of bandwidth.
We're engaged in a discussion at present with the Burlington Northern Santa Fe regarding the spur line that runs to some of our industrial clients. And one of the main driving factors in that discussion is providing the local community with the control over whether or not that spur exists, rather than having another private company come in and buy that line and control it. A lot of communities are stepping up in the rail area and trying to secure the rights so that that stays available. One of the communities I worked in, they lost all rail service, and they wound up having to invest in owning that. They didn't want to operate it. They didn't want to be in the railroad business, but they certainly wanted to preserve the rail access to their communities. And I think that's one of the aspects that this provides you with, is that if you own a system that provides bandwidth to your residents, you in essence have got some guarantee that you're going to have that service available, and that you do have some input into how that service is provided in the future. One of the problems we have with the current cable structure is that since the federal laws have been passed that have removed the ability of municipalities to regulate cable providers, is that there really isn't a local ability to influence what, other than through just political force, what services that company provides. And that's not intended to be any kind of a slight. That's just an observation about the system nationwide. But if you own that infrastructure, then you're going to have a direct commercial interest in how that service is provided, because you're in essence the landlord, and you can stipulate that in the form of the contract that you let with the provider that wants to provide the service to the customers. And I am not convinced that you couldn't even possibly entertain more than one provider. I think we would need to look at that model. You may find that the offer is more attractive financially with fewer providers than it would be with multiple providers. But I think that's part of the business discussion that we need to have when we formulate a business model and moving forward.
You could end up in a situation where it would have to go to a vote of the people. A true franchise, for example, is one in which you create a true monopoly on a service, and that's the sort of thing that the state statutes anticipate going to a vote of the people. You know, whereas under our current situation, the city can essentially permit or lease out the easements to all kinds of people. You know, it just happens to be that cable, to my knowledge, is the only one carrying a video signal, for example. AT&T, I think, uses some of our DSL lines, I think, go on city easements as well. But if the city had an asset and owned the asset and granted the exclusive right to use that asset for a business function, you might find yourself facing a legal requirement that it go to a vote of the people, because it might then become a true franchise.
Jeff,
Still have dish and all that as far as competitors to.
And you're not limiting access to your easements. You're basically controlling the wire that you own.
True.
Jeff, or Tyler, do you know anyone around here that's using the CMAR approach?
I don't know that anyone has used CMAR approach for this particular type of an application. We haven't used it until this past year ourselves, so it's kind of a new and unique approach. But as far as the implementation of the project that we've had at Red Robinson, has been moving very smoothly, and I think it's because we've got the expertise at the table.
And again, it's not that CMAR is an untried and untested methodology. If I remember correctly, the state attorney general utilized CMR to build their new offices. So it's not that it's untried and untested, it's just not used as widely.
I don't think it's used as widely in municipalities as it could be.
Correct. I would agree.
Could be or should be.
Well, you won't find SCAF telling you from a prescriptive standpoint which process you should use. Will tell you what the advantages and disadvantages are. But I can tell you from a personal standpoint, it's been a very I don't want to say painless, but it's been a very user-friendly process. And I wish, in hindsight, it's always 2020. It would have been lovely if we could have used this in the street program.
Mm-hmm.
We might have been able to forego a lot of the externalities that have been created as a result of it. But I think it's really something that we should consider for any project that we want to move forward is have some type of a process where we decide whether we want to look at it as an option versus the traditional route.
I think Rudy would probably agree. The events there, that's been going, it's been pretty effective.
But when it comes to something like what we're talking about here on the meters and everything, what's the difference between that versus a turnkey? I mean, do you think there's just a lot of potential savings in the other option, or do you think?
I think it provides you with a little bit of flexibility and control the same AI process. I mean, for example, with Red Robinson, there's a lot of give and take between the trust and the construction manager and the architect. Whereas if you have a contract and you have deliverables, then the company that's providing that's going to basically decide what's appropriate and what's not appropriate. And one of the beauties of the CMAR process, I think, is that it provides you that ability to, how do I say this? You know, the options when we're doing it ourselves, you're in complete control, you're driving the bus. When you've written the specifications, you somehow control that process to a certain degree. But in this process, you have the expert who tries to explain to you why that's a bad decision. And when we're doing it ourselves, there's no one there to tell us when we've made a bad decision. And one of the things I've liked about the Red Robinson process is not only do we have the construction manager that can tell us, well, our experience has been that that particular type of pipe doesn't work well in this type of soil, but you've also got your owner's representative who's built lots of stadiums. I mean, it would have been, imagine staff attempting to build a college football stadium. We've never done it. But the people that are advising us have. So we've got layers there of expertise. And just to kind of keep it in perspective, this project's slightly larger than the event center. I mean, when you look at it from a scope standpoint. And what we've discovered from reviewing what other communities have gone through and doing these, you really don't want to do these projects yourself. I mean, you can really make some serious mistakes. And I think realizing what those problems can be and trying to insulate us from that risk is where we really need to be. So regardless of what process you want to go through, we really need to spend a lot of time and energy at trying to define and controlling the amount of risk that we're going to be that's going to be on our part.
Councilman Charbot, you probably recall, but the way I've explained the difference between the two processes is in the kind of historically common bid to spec regular way, for lack of a better term, of doing a construction project. You got to not only know what you want, but you got to know how to get there. And if you've never built one before, you almost have to reinvent the wheel every time you do something. You've never done it before, but you got to come up with your own specs. Whereas in the CMAR approach, again, you know how much money you want to spend, but beyond basically describing what it is you want, you turn loose the construction manager to get it done.
So here's a good analogy. Your city brand X, and you do this project, and you mess it up. And there's much drama, there's lots of problems. And you go out and you find expert Y to come in and fix the mess. This skips that process and goes right to expert Y and says, hey, expert Y, since you've done so many of these and you're the people that people turn to fix these, why don't you do it to begin with? So we don't wind up in that situation where we have to go hire you to come and clean up this situation. So that process, I think, that advantage is one of the key advantages of using the CMAR or any type of approach that you use that's going to be turnkey. And I think
Right.
whatever option that we do, we should definitely look at doing some type of a turnkey approach.
To me, the turnkey is going to, I definitely wouldn't want us doing it as a city, but if the turnkey is something that they've done hundreds of them, they've been in communities like with our size or smaller or larger, they're gonna understand.
And that's CMAR.
Well, I guess Joe's question is, what are you saving? I mean, if you've got a turnkey approach and they're gonna get it all done, and your CMAR is gonna get it all done also, they're both experts, what's the benefit of the CMAR approach? There has to be some savings in there somewhere. Otherwise, what's the incentive? Is that,
Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
not sure that
Your
there's,
question.
I'm not sure that we can articulate it in the form of a savings. They're just different approaches.
A lot fewer opportunities to screw up. I'd like to put it to you that way. I mean,
Yeah, I would say that Neil and I, having gone through this process, had we had a turnkey, if you will, we would have had a lot of decisions to make, and we would have had to make those decisions without really, not that the people aren't going to advise you some, but you don't really have, the benefit of having somebody kind of on your side. So when we got to the point that, hey, we're $300,000 over budget, and now we need to do some what they call value engineering. What are some ideas? And that's where Crossland in this case we were able to work with them and say, well, you can take a little bit different approach here. You can do this. I mean, we did. I do think in this instance, we were able to influence the process and get a better outcome. Of course, we're only halfway through, but we're able to have that influence, and the result is going to be a better outcome for the taxpayers, I think, dollar for dollar. But saying that, because the implication of the construction manager at risk part of it is, okay, well, what do you mean he's at risk? What is there to lose? Well, he is in effect saying, I can do this project for this amount of money. Okay, but you kind of have all those conversations up front and kind of get everything clear up front. And so there's where the risk, they're taking on that risk as opposed to the city in this case.
The level of expertise is wonderful because I give you a great example, and hopefully it's not too far into the weeds. You got to know what to bid, right? If it's the traditional model where you specify and they bid on your specifications, whether your turnkey product is what you really wanted or not depends on whether you came up with the right specifications. And that implies we as an institution are sufficiently expert, qualified, familiar enough to know what our specifications really ought to be. So we spend, in that model, all of our time and money trying to figure out what it is we want and how to spec it out. And that's what I meant by there's a lot of room for kind of screwing that up.
And even with the turnkey approach, you're still going to be price driven to a certain degree in that analysis. When you go and select who you're going to select, ultimately it's a quantitative decision. In the CMAR process, you're basically basing that more on qualifications, your ability to be able to when we went through the process of selecting the CMAR, it wasn't based on price. We had our price to begin with. This is what we can afford. What can you bring to the table to make sure we get it done for that amount of money? Whereas the other one, as you saw with the Claremore and Skytook, there was a price per unit, and at some point in time, the decision was, well, their price per unit looks better than their price per unit.
When you have somebody like Crossland, in this case, that has relationships with hundreds of vendors, they know how to marshal their forces, and they know how to lay things out in such a way that it's the most attractive to all those subcontractors, and you end up getting better bids. I mean, there's no question in my mind that by using Crossland, their expertise and the way they just set things up, I don't know any other phrase to use other than that, they were able to get significantly better bids than we would have ever been able to get. And you can get a turnkey guy that can also, probably some of them will have that expertise. But I mean, it has definitely, in my opinion, been a superior process. Now, we also, and I don't know if there's going to be a similar person available to us, but having the owner's rep was, I think, key also, because it's just that other person, and I mean, they really are working for you. The CMAR is helping you hand in hand, but these other guys are watching the whole process. And I don't know if we would have the equivalent of an owner's rep in the CMAR process for this kind of project.
I can assure you, sir, the staff would recommend that we do that. And we've already identified certain firms throughout the country that provide that service. It's again that why person that's been coming in and cleaning up everybody else's mess ups that I think we really want to have at the table to begin with, because they really understand what they're doing.
Project management historically, just gonna say it bluntly, hasn't necessarily been the strong suit here. When I look at some of the controversies and legal controversies that the city found itself in over the last 5 or 6 years.
So we're jumping ahead of ourselves a little bit in that we're deciding now who's going to do it, and we haven't really decided to do it yet. But, I do think that the CMAR process is one that we need to give heavy consideration to when we get to that phase. I guess the question, what is it, what direction are you seeking tonight specifically as far as the next step?
We're basically trying to get an idea of what's on your mind. How do you feel about this? I mean, if you want to go back to that drawing board, to the initial question, should we or should we not? We're happy to go there. If you want us to bring that back to you at a different date, that's fine. If you want to give us perspectives on whether or not you want us to bring some more specific proposals to you regarding more detailed analysis, we have a proposal from another consultant who will get in and do an even more detailed analysis of it. I mean, I know we get criticized sometimes for hiring consultants to do things that are considered to be obvious, but I'm not sure that anything in this particular situation is obvious, and it probably wouldn't hurt us to have another, because it's a sizable investment, to have another individual come in and take a look at it and give us some expert recommendations.
I think that the citizens probably don't appreciate how much we're able to offer in the way of services because we own our electric utility. I mean, for a town our size, that additional revenue, I don't know what we would do without it. We certainly wouldn't be the community that we are. And with that in mind, I think one of the things that we need to think about philosophically, as Jeff pointed out early on, do we not just want to be wholesale retail, but do we want to do this? Or, you know, if cable's out there and they're running all this fiber, we can get the benefits of the AMI by just having the wireless talk to their fiber. So we can get a lot of that using Cable One. And we haven't had any conversations with them, but we just know that they're out there, and there'll probably be other people out there doing it too. But if we do that, we're making the decision to forego the opportunity ourselves to generate additional revenue, be it wholesale or retail. And I'm kind of like Jeff, that just because of just philosophically, I'm more inclined towards the wholesale side, partly because of customer service issues, but just because philosophically that's kind of how I see it. But then you do give up that extra margin, and you know, as a consumer, I might say, well, if I'm going to pay Joe for it, I may as well pay John for it, and knowing that John is helping pave my streets. I don't know. It's, you know, it is a philosophical difference. So I guess what I'm saying is the first kind of decision is, do we think that we want to build out the infrastructure ourselves, knowing that we can have some level of margin, be it at wholesale or retail, and be able to provide then with that margin greater services to our customers. Maybe not for a while, depending on the costs.
Do we know what the return on investment is?
Well, I don't think you're not going to find that this is going to be a very sexy ROI. Our main goal is to try to come up with a scenario that breaks even. I mean, our experience from what we've seen in other communities, they're having to subsidize it to a certain degree. We're hoping that any model that we come up with is going to at a minimum break even. But I don't think we're looking at any real significant return on investment.
Break even over 20 years?
Over the financing period, you know, basically that we're going to be able to recover the costs of capital, cost of financing, and the cost of operations.
So when the city built the infrastructure for our electric department, they were facing the same type of decision we're facing now.
That's correct.
That for the next 20 years, we're going to be paying for all the poles and wire, and then in year 21 through 100, there'll be some additional revenue.
Right. Depreciation expense is a very interesting discussion, and I didn't really want to get into great detail, but the models that we've looked at when we've included depreciation into it don't break even. The models we've looked in where we just look at it as a cash in, cash out, they do at present create a small return. So it really depends on whether or not if we're going to try to factor in depreciation. So let me talk about depreciation just for a second. Private sector uses depreciation as a tax treatment. It's a way to monetize the depreciating value of your assets over time so that you actually don't have to pay taxes on that loss of asset value. We don't pay taxes. So depreciation becomes, in essence, a recapture tool. In other words, when government units use depreciation, it's basically, in essence, another way of providing for a reserve fund or a sinking fund to replace the asset. So let's use the electric system as an example. Let's assume that we had when we first built it, what year, anybody help me, what year we built the power system? 1909, maybe? Anyway, let's just assume that by 1940, the initial depreciation had run its course. And from that point on, we had fully depreciated assets. So we're deriving pure net income from their operation. So we can look at this system and we can factor in a depreciation schedule based on a 10, a 15, a 20-year model. But where a municipality looks at these types of assets with a much longer term. I mean, we build a street, for example, we're about to start a discussion on a street that will have a 10 to 20-year financing period, but we're expecting the street to last 30 years. Just like that, in this particular situation, we're expecting a lot of this infrastructure to last well beyond the depreciation schedule. Now, you're going to have reinvestments along the way. We've already talked about the head end. We're going to have to replace head ends at time. There's going to be bottlenecks that we encounter in the system that we're going to have to replace. So that's a possibility. The problem that you get in calculating return on investment in a government situation is we're not paying taxes. So if you calculate depreciation in the model, you're getting a return on the investment in the depreciation. When you calculate return on investment, return of capital, return of the initial investment is inherent in a positive ROI. So if we produce a positive return on investment, we've also recaptured it. So governments have a tendency of double booking, if you will. We put the depreciation and then calculate the cash flow after depreciation and factor that in as our return on investment. Well, you've actually got it twice because you're not paying taxes. So you're not treating that depreciation as a tax treatment. You're in essence creating a sinking fund for it. You know, a lot of accounting that deals with enterprise funds, proprietary accounting, in a lot of states, they will factor in depreciation in their schedules. And then the idea behind that is it creates a replacement fund, if you will. And accounting is a little bit different in Oklahoma. We don't quite do that. So when we look at these pro formas that include depreciation, no, we don't look at getting a return on investment in that scenario. But when we look at it just from a cash-on-cash standpoint, we put in X number of dollars cash, we spend so much money operating it, we spend so much money financing it, and at the end of the day, the money we got out of it exceeds the money we put into it. And then once you get to a certain point of the financing, the initial burden of the initial build-out has been recaptured, then you're going to see it just like we do with electric utility. Future generations are going to generate cash flow from that. That is, unless technology comes up with something entirely different and we don't even use wires to deliver information at that point. And that's a whole other discussion.
Cell phones.
Will
So-
it pay for itself? Sorry, Kristen.
I was just gonna ask, so do we have a break even?
Yeah, I mean,
Analysis.
the models, the feasibility study that we shared with you had a break-even model in it. It was based on a wholesale, assumed certain factors. We currently are vetting that with a potential customer to make sure that they would be comfortable with those rates. They've looked at it, and they've indicated that they want another discussion. So we're taking that as a positive sign at this point in time. But yeah, the model is that we don't want to be in a salsa situation where we're having to subsidize it. but that through a combination of, you know, the savings on meter readings, the rental income from leasing it out from a wholesale standpoint, plus the efficiencies gained in the system exceed the initial capital outlay.
Jeff, wasn't that what, for example, Noresco was proposing, that they would take the risk of this thing paying for itself or not paying for itself?
Right, that model and their model, based on, you know, similar to the CMAR, we've been doing this for many years. We've got these capabilities and expertise. We will come in and analyze your system. We will propose you a build out, and we will guarantee that you will save X, and that savings will pay for the project. But with all due respect to Noresco, I still think there's an inherent burden on the city to know what it's doing before it enters into that contract, to make sure that the contract is exactly what we want. And to me, that's the difference between the CMAR process, is the fact that we bring in the experts that serve as our advisors throughout the whole process, telling us, well, we've done this here, we've done this there, we've got this capability, don't do that, do this. That's the added dimension I think you get in that scenario. And I'm not trying to default them. I think, you know, there's a lot of communities that have been very successful in using that model, especially for things like lighting or places where you have energy efficiency.
You think an owner's rep would get most of that same benefit?
I think you could. I'm not trying to say, and I don't want to get the impression that we think CMAR is the only route to go. You certainly could with owner's rep. I built a prison once in Washington State. We had an owner's rep in that and worked very similar process. So you have that expert, you bring them in temporarily to give you advice on what's the best way to do this. I mean, from a traditional route, that's the role that the engineer plays, like in a street program when they're doing the design and stuff. But it's becoming more and more of a trend, and even in those more traditional bidding models, that you do construction management is a separate contract with a separate entity that comes in and monitors things. I mean, ultimately, you can't afford to maintain a staff that has expertise in everything. It's the same reason why the city engineer is a generalist. We can't have an electrical engineer, a civil engineer, mechanical engineer, you know, experts in each of these disciplines. I mean, you don't go see a chiropractor for surgery, although
Christie, did you have a question?
I was just gonna ask Tyler to send me the original presentation.
Yes, ma'am.
on it. I don't think I've
Doug, did you
gotten
have
to
it
see
too?
it.
I can't remember how long ago that's been.
I don't think
When
you got it
When they
either.
did the original presentation.
It's been a while back.
On the surface, it looks like a good project, but I would like to understand it, the numbers that have already been discussed and the
my
data.
apologies, ma'am. You have not seen the feasibility study.
Uh,
I don't think
no.
Doug
Nor
has
has
it.
Doug. Because it's been a little while.
Yeah, it's been a while.
Time flies. We will get that back out to you.
Yeah, so I'd like to take a look at that.
Sure.
I think the direction to go is definitely the reading the meters and
Yeah, like I said, I don't
Electric meters,
see that
water
that's
meters.
gonna make me feel different, that being able to do something like this is a good thing for the city and, from a city management standpoint and for the people, the customers. But I'd like a chance to look at
Sure.
all the information on it.
What kind of rates are out there right now, Jeff, on borrowing? You know,
You know, you're looking at a range of 2 something to 4 something, depending on the rating and the term. We're seeing municipal leases. I think Noresco recently told me that they've done one recently in the mid 2s to upper 2s. Our bond counsel is telling us that on a 20-year, we're looking in the neighborhood of the high 3s to the low 4s.
and I think that's, just something else that argues for acting sooner rather than later is, we're still, I think the valley, I think rates have already started to step
Yeah,
back
just
up from where we were
Comparing
last
that, you know,
time.
with on Red Robinson, we got a 2 something.
Yeah,
So, yeah, I mean, just fluctuations in the bond market have been rather volatile. Not significantly. I mean, even we're talking, small percentages, but
So other than resending the information, is there any other direction that you are looking for from us tonight?
Now, I think based on what I've heard, and correct me if I'm wrong on my read of what I've heard tonight, is that we want to get the initial information back out to you, allow you some more time to think about this, allow opportunities for you to see what's on people's minds when they watch this or read about it, and then give us further direction at a later date.
Let's take a quick break, about 5 minutes, and then we'll come back and move on to the next item. Back. Are we on TV? Do we need to be? Okay, thank you. Item number 5, discuss possible future general bond obligation, including potential reconstruction of the truck route. We discussed this a little bit last time. Mr. Bishop, you have some new information you want to share with us on that as far as the availability of funding?
Yeah, we're going to talk a little bit about the availability of funding, and we've actually had Mr. Snyder sharpen his pencil a little bit and get into drill down some little bit more details, more of a menu approach.
Okay, great.
And then we can have some discussions about why the truck route is, what our options are from an alternative standpoint. It's also our duty to inform you that we've actually had some residents have called us that do not want us to fix it because some of them that are involved in the vehicle repair business actually use the bad road to test out squeaks and rattles in the vehicles they work on. So
They can't find another one?
we had suggested that we might have viable alternatives, but given the vehicle, it might be required to be on truck route. So.
Okay.
Well, we've gone through, Tyler and I went through, and we've looked at a lot of different options. So we've got some lighter end all the way to the full construction. I wanted just to point out here.
Yeah, we want to point out that there was some thought about bringing the street committee back, but in in October of 2013, their term expired. So
So that was for a defined period of
yes,
time.
sir. So we're
That's- I
moving
forgot,
kind
yeah.
of what they did more to the planning commission now. So we'll be presenting stuff to the planning commission.
Okay,
From now on.
thank you for that.
So we looked at these 4 options, and the first one, we'll look at, there's 2 options, variants for that. They're going to go from the lighter end to the full replacement. The full replacement we talked about last time. Next slide. And here we actually had some bids from about 2 years ago. We had a 2-inch mill and overlay, and then a 5-inch mill and overlay. We've updated those to account for a little bit of inflation and a small contingency. The
So
one
those
factor,
numbers are updated?
yes.
Okay.
Now, the one thing with the number 1B, there is some issue because when we did do some cores, we did about 10 cores. There's a layer down here at the very bottom. The layers, that 4th layer may not be present. And about half the cores, they weren't present. So when the street was built over time, the thickness varies. So when you do a 5-inch mill, we do run the chance of having too little asphalt in place. And so that the danger or the fear there is we start milling, we've milled too much, and the paving machine starts to damage more of the existing pavement than we had planned. So that 5-inch mill was, I think we did that just for costing, to see what it would be, but
So, if we went to 4-inch, I mean, was there 2 to 5? Is there just an arbitrary
no.
decision, or
There
what
was,
it?
at the time, we needed a 5-inch mill and overlay to meet the trucks at the time.
Okay.
For the 20-year design life. So we looked at it, but we also realized that if the repairs weren't done well, and they started doing the milling and the repairs weren't done right, or didn't do it well enough in the areas, that we might have to stop and do repairs to even continue with the 5-inch overlay. We went with the 2-inch mill just to see kind of the cost difference.
Okay, and
Obviously,
that 2
design
inches
life
for
was
the
much-
entire length?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, next slide. And this is where we did the alternatives. We've talked with Joe and Tyler, and I believe they've talked to you too. This is kind of a compromise approach to get the intersections done right, to get the truck turn lane done right, and also at the very end of the truck route on Main Street to get that so that the water flows correct. So here we looked at the intersections at Central and 3rd Street. They look a little bit higher, but that was also to fix the drainage. And just like we were talking about before, pipes choking, We think that water's choking underneath the railroad tracks. That's the likely area, because the railroad tracks, when they were first put in, were probably right sized for MIAM at the time, but over time it's developed more, and they're probably just too small of a capacity. So part of that, the intersection was not only to make the intersection structurally sound, but also to help it pass water.
So
that's-
what are we looking at in the two different colors, the blue and the red?
The blue was to represent more of a, here's the concrete paving or a concrete drainage, and the red was going to be later, we're going to talk about a milling in between the areas. So it was a compromise approach between
Okay.
the areas. And then we also split out, if you go back one, Jeff, the truck extensions. Where we did the intersection, at one time we just looked at the intersection and having basically enough for 2 cars to be in the concrete pavement. And then depending on whether the truck route would stay the truck route or if money was an issue, that we also had a 75-foot extension beyond the intersection, so that when you had traffic there, you could have 2 cars and a truck on concrete, or 1 truck and then half of a truck on the rest of the concrete. So we added that in kind of a line by line, so if it did have budgeted implications, there was some flexibility there. And then in between where we did the concrete, to help extend the life more, this would be where we do a mill between the intersections, between the intersection and the truck turn, and between the truck turn and Main Street. Also exposing the gutters, reclaiming the gutters so that the gutters could flow. Right now the gutters have about 2 inches of asphalt, and so sometimes they flow, but they only flow when they flood. The way the gutter's designed is so even on small rains, they can still flow, go to the storm box and flow out. But right now, the capacity of the gutter is not there because you've put 2 inches of asphalt there, and then at the intersections, it can't cross the intersection until it floods. So it was the idea there, we'll mill from basically curb face to curb face, or saw cut at the curb, and then pull it up. That would be the better option to get rid of the asphalt that's in the gutter. Mill. In this thing, if we just do an overlay, an asphalt overlay, in general, the rule of thumb is if you put down 3 inches of asphalt and you've got cracks underneath, you can expect the cracks to start coming back about 1 inch per year. So 3 years from now, when Joe's out there and they're looking, and Edward's looking, and they're saying, hey, there's this crack starting to come up, that's about when it'll come up. And you can see that it's fairly good rule of thumb. Now that's when the cracks first start. Obviously, it takes longer for the cracks to propagate throughout the pavement, but they'll first start showing up there. But the idea behind using it's called it's an interlayer grid, but it uses fiberglass and it adds a tensile strength to the asphalt. And there's also a non-woven fabric. So when you put the technique is you mill your road, you put down the what's called a leveling course, so maybe about a 3/4 inch level of asphalt, because when they mill, it's a very rough surface, so that 3/4 inch to 1 inch leveling course will get that area smooth. You put down a tack coat, basically an asphalt glue, so that when you put the grid on it, it'll have something to bind to. But that grid will help keep water from entering through, because eventually it will crack, because we haven't repaired the asphalt underneath. So when it does crack at the surface, it hits this layer and water's not able to penetrate through. And that's the greatest killer of pavements, is when water gets down in, like you can see now on the truck route, right where the truck wheels are running. It's when it started to crack, you see all these alligator cracks. So when it does rain, water gets in there. It's much, much easier to get in there, get saturated. It's very hard for water to leave, either by evaporation or trying to migrate out. So that's when those cracks, it's just a never-ending battle. Once they start to crack, it just gets worse and worse and worse until you seal it. So what that grid does is the non-woven part helps keep water from getting in there, and the fiberglass adds the strength. But what it does is it adds the life. So that 3-inch asphalt overlay might last 3 to 4 times longer before your first crack gets there. So it buys you time and extends your design life.
John, how does it react to water main breaks underneath it?
Now, with water mains and you have to do the repairs, you're going to have to saw cut and replace. So we'd have to look ahead of time before, ideally, to say where do we want to fix things in the water main. Because once you do saw cut it, you do destroy that. But what the street crews do typically is they use a stone for their backfill, not soil. And so the idea is that what they've been doing now would be an equivalent or better than what we would do, so that repair wouldn't be the shortfall anymore.
How does this compare to the old Petromat?
A couple differences. The Petromat, for one, if we ever decided we wanted to mill, the Petromat can't be milled again. Contractors hate the Petromat because if you wanted to mill it again, as soon as you hit that layer, it just gums up and you can't really mill anymore.
Right.
This is a millable product, so you can mill if you needed to. In this case, we probably wouldn't advise it because we've already kind of extended the route, several times. So, but the strength has also been improved over the Petromat. The Petromat was kind of the first version of these products.
My experience with the Petromat was that if you had a main break underneath it, where the water came up might not necessarily be where the main break was.
Correct, because it's a waterproofer underneath.
And it would
also.
it would run literally thousands of yards sometimes, and you'd hunt the break and you'd tear up a brand new road. So
Right.
this doesn't do that.
No, this would also be harder to find. You'd have a hard time if you found it and you couldn't find it where you thought it was. It would help it keep the water going both ways. So that's it.
So in this particular option, it would behoove you to go in and replace the water main that's in that area before you put down this product.
Right. Correct. And I think as Tyler Cole can tell you, in the street construction, basically the soils in Miami are slightly acidic, but give them 30 years, and that slight acidity has kind of corroded the pipes. And I think there's several water breaks just from exposing the pipes, and the construction equipment's a little bit too close, and they've just broken. And so that would be one thing that ahead of time we'd want to do before we did that option.
So Jeff, what are you saying? Are you saying replacing pipe all along the truck route, or are you saying mains?
Mains, well, mains and even service lines to a certain degree, depending on how large they are. I mean, if you've got like a 2-inch service coming off of a main on that, you probably want to get it replaced before you put down this kind of a product. Simply because you're putting a waterproof substance over the top of a water-bearing device, and if you get a main break, it could hit that and deflect, and then you wind up tearing up a lot of the road replacing it. Now, there's devices that you can get that.
This is where the AMI would be very great. You'd say, okay, I need it's between this address and this address, and so even if you didn't see it,
we could figure out
out
where it's at.
Yeah.
But
But you still tear up the road.
well, you're still going to tear. I mean, we've already had this happen in some areas. With one of the problems with the Oil Street program is that we didn't do infrastructure replacement before we built some of these roads, and we've already had some of these new concrete roads where we've had a break. Luckily, with the concrete, you just replace that panel, and we can pour that panel. But on an asphalt road, you're looking at a cut, and anytime you put a cut in a street, you're creating a point of weakness for moisture to get down in. Care how much you seal it,
right.
you still are going to shorten the lifespan of that investment.
And then go ahead and go. This was just the one we talked about last time. This included basically replacing everything full length. Now, obviously, it would be probably less, but it was just if we did go from point A to point B and treat it like a brand new street, this is what we'd have for the cost there. And this was just kind of a summary to kind of see kind of from very low level up to the full reconstruction, kind of the cost, what it means, the maintenance for like the public works, and the years. The years is kind of a first tracking. Obviously, the truck route now, I looked at it 2 years ago. I've looked at it several times. It's hard to see much difference, but I know that we've got a few more cracks here. Mike Edwards and those guys replaced sections. Sometimes it's hard to see the fact because they've done a good job of maintaining. But as far as years, this is kind of when the cracks would first start to come up. Joe, you probably could speak. When you first start seeing cracks, it kind of depends on the trucks, how much water you get in there, but you might, from the first crack to where it starts to seeing potholes might be 3, 4, 5 years. So I imagine like on the truck route right now, you get the right rain and the right trucks running, and some of those cracked areas are going to become potholes. And then, so obviously they're going to repair those, and so you can still drive over, but it's just going to be more and more potholes. So that's where I was talking about, holding, not doing anything. Somewhere you're going to start seeing more and more potholes compared to their normal rate of doing things. When you do the mill, the 2-inch overlay, that was the first thing. That was just straight milling, to take 2 inches off, put 2 inches back. Obviously, the wearing surface will be nice. Cracks will start to come out. It'd be 2 to 3 years before the cracks, but it might last 5, 7 years till you start having to maintain it, and you're spending a lot of time doing pothole repairs and things like that. So the overlay, and then with the 1B, we're talking about when you start to mill too much, because we don't have a lot of existing asphalt, and the asphalt that is there, the best asphalt is what you see at the surface. The asphalt layers 2, 3, and if 4 is there, they're not very strong. Normally, when our guys went to core it, conventional asphalt or conventional concrete, you'll core 4 inches, and you get a cylinder that looks like a cylinder, and it's fully intact. When we did the second and third and fourth layers, instead of getting 4 inches, we got about 2.5 inches. Some of the samples, when they came out, at first we didn't know, even we thought maybe our guys had done it, and so we made them go back and core again, and they came again, and then we realized it was just a poor grade asphalt. Some of the asphalt we could just take in our hands and break up. So it is, when we did this before, we looked at design purposes, we treated the existing lower poor asphalt more like a base stone. It has value, but not as an asphalt. So it's kind of done its design life, and it's kind of, instead of being an asphalt, old asphalt layer, it's an old base stone layer.
John, is 2 and 3 a set?
Yeah, 2 and 3 was designed to be a set, so we're 2, we go in like in 2015, do the intersections, do the truck turn. If the budget was an issue, maybe split it up into 2 years. And then once that got done, the next year or the year after that, start doing the milling and then the overlay in between the sections.
So the theory behind 2 is that you're putting concrete in the areas where you've got the maximum amount of force that's being applied by braking trucks.
Right, and also trying to improve the key drainage areas.
So if we go back to this drawing, certainly at the turn, clearly self-evident why concrete would be better there because of the forces that you're getting
Right.
from.
They're starting to decelerate,
Right.
and they're making the turns. And then also in that area, it may not be very obvious, but I know for Joe and his guys that there's water that has a hard time draining there. It's just an odd shape. I think it's 20 years ago they did this, 15 years ago they did this. They replaced this, they overlaid this, and so just water doesn't flow right. So that's also a drainage.
At the other 2 locations in this graphic, if we did a traffic study and came to the conclusion that we didn't need lights at those 2 locations and made D through, would we need the concrete at that point in time, or is that a
No,
drainage
not
issue
the
there?
concrete wouldn't be needed for the trucks or for the stopping, but you would still want to address the drainage issue. But
Could you do that
making
with
the
gutters?
intersection concrete would no.
You couldn't do it with valley gutters or anything like that?
Not in these areas, because basically all the water west of the truck route in these areas, they flow through these 2 intersections. So they're key for as far as, and then the issue is the railroad. If the railroad were in there, you might be able to do it with some sort of gutter or some sort of ditch. But basically the only option is to kind of find out what's underneath the railroad, and what we've planned is basically creating a parallel set of pipes that would go parallel to what's there existing to increase the capacity. I think what we're going to find when we do that is that to make it designed for full life, it would be a much bigger pipe. But I think what's happening is that when, because we have Beaver Dam and we've got the Neosho River and Tar Creek, that the design of this system is probably right-sized except for the underneath the railroad.
So, I just want to be clear, all this blue is concrete?
Well, it's kind of 2 things. That was concrete at the top. This was concrete at the intersection, and we were trying to illustrate at the intersections that there's going to be some sort of pipe that would go from the intersection underneath the railroad tracks.
So you're not saying this is concrete?
That was a
is.
concrete and a drainage issue. trying to
The skinny
do both.
piece that runs to the east, right, I think that represents a pipe.
Right. And the intersection would be concrete. The intent of the concrete would be, let's address the drainage issues, get the boxes right. also make the intersection concrete so that it greater strength, and then for some distance for cars and trucks to be able to sit when they stop and start.
So the purpose behind the concrete in these particular situations is to prevent kind of a washboarding? Because when the trucks slow down, what have you, they
Get a
literally
little bit of shoving.
push the.
So, Jeff, can you go back then to the 1, 2, 3, 4 options that we were looking at? Okay, so on the aesthetic side, I'm a little confused as to what each of those mean.
What,
Can you?
that would be kind of like driving down the street. What are you going to see?
Okay.
You're just you live half a mile from the D Street and you go down there. What are you going to see? This is what you'll see. You won't see all the effort that was put in, but in the end, what would you see? When you see the mill, you're going to see something. Hey, you've taken some action. It's going to look good. The one thing you won't see is you won't see the gutters. They'll still be covered with asphalt. So you might see, instead of
You're
normally you
saying
see
gutters, and that says, you mean the curb?
right.
This is
Yeah.
only-
Instead of seeing a 6-inch curb, you'll see 2 or 3 inches of curb.
Okay.
So in that sense, you'll know. Most people don't realize that. Hey, you're supposed to have 6 inches.
Right.
You've seen so many times it's only 2 or 3 inches. Most people think that's the norm, but.
And
So those
so
are the
then-
kind of things you would see. So most of the things you would see, like, hey, we did action, we're making progress.
So when you say new on 1B, new only curb visible, you're saying, because now you've gone down 5 inches, so you see all the curb. And is that what you're saying?
Right. Well, the fact that you would be going down and you would, when you're driving, you say, "Oh, this is the new street because it's been
Okay.
striped and it's black," and oh, I can see the curbs now. So they must have fixed the road. In reality, we've kind of fixed it aesthetically, increased the design life, but drainage and things like that would continue to be the same. So when it rained, that 2-3 times a year, and you're going through a foot of water, then you would realize, oh, they didn't fix the drainage.
So if 2 and 3 were parts, or phase 1 and 2,
Yes.
okay, in the way that you've talked about it, and so number 2, which would be the phase 1, you do the concrete work that you've talked about and the drainage work, and that concrete areas are projected to have a 30-year life. And then phase 2, part 3, you're basically doing an overlay. And so what do you mean when you say expose the gutters? Because if you're at 1,000,001 there and you're at 1,000,001 on B.
Well, the idea behind that was not to replace the gutters. If we were to replace the gutters, that's quite a bit of concrete, and there's a fairly significant amount of cost. So the idea was use the gutters where we can to the extent that we can,
Okay.
let them flow, and then the pavement in between the gutters will be replaced as far as the milling and overlay. So we would try to use the existing gutters. They're fairly decent. Most of the gutters are fairly decent shape. There's sections that should be replaced, but before when you did the last mill and overlay, and the gutters were exposed, I understood they flowed fairly. They flowed. It may not have been well, but they flowed better
That was
than they did.
15 years ago.
Right.
14. And I can't remember, but I'm thinking the gutters, some of them had scaled off in places, but as you well know, anytime you put anything in a gutter, you're slowing the water down.
So let me ask them a question this way. What is the difference in 1B and 3? Because the costs are about the same.
Right, for 1B, that would be milling and replacing with 5 inches of asphalt. That 5 inches of asphalt is only going to last so long because there's nothing to keep it from cracking because the underlying asphalt is already cracked.
Okay.
With the number 3, we're essentially milling 3 inches and replacing with 3 inch, and we're relying on that interlayer grid of the non-woven fabric and the polyester, the fiberglass, to reinforce that. So basically, you're getting an increased design level.
Okay, that's what I was trying to understand, because the costs were about the same. In number 1B, you're doing the whole truck route, whereas here you're not, so I was trying to understand where the difference was.
And then in the 1B also, we would have to do very well on identifying areas that would to be repaired before they started doing the milling, or if they milled, these areas have to be marked off well, because once you start paving, if the exposed pavement that you've milled is not strong enough to support the paving machine, because the paving machine is not very heavy, but when they put the asphalt in the hopper, and then you're going to have lots of trucks back up to the hopper, this road has to be able to withstand construction. And if it can't, then it starts to shrink things. That's where you have to stop and make those repairs, and that's where the change orders would come in.
So if you add 2 and 3 together, you're right at about $2 million, which is the number we talked about last time being available. Now, since then, maybe we understand there might be a different number, but,
Yes and no.
okay. So do you have a recommendation, or does the staff have a recommendation?
We do not have a recommendation. We have a couple of choices to put forward to
Okay.
the council.
And does any of the other council members have any questions before we move on to the next phase?
This was just an
What's the
example
cost
of
to
that
maintain it a
interlink.
year right now? What are we spending on it a year?
I don't know that we have, I don't know if we're tracking costs on that particular road, Councilman. We're in the process of implementing our GIS system, and a work order module is part of that, and we'll be able to track those types of things in the future, but at present, we don't have the data of that. I mean, we could start generating that, but there hasn't been any historical numbers to be able to track what we've done in the past. This is a really neat graphic, John.
Well,
I
this
hate to not
graphic
let you
was
talk
just to
about
help
it.
you, the top graphic was to show, this is that 5-inch mill and overlay. 5th year down the road, 6th year, it starts to crack, water is able to penetrate through the layer that you just placed, plus the underlying layers. So it gets the stone and the soil wet, it pumps a little bit, it moves a little bit more, another crack shows. And so the cracks start to propagate, and the more cracks you get, the more water you get, the weaker the soil, then you get more cracks. It's kind of a never-ending battle until you stop the water from coming there. The idea behind the interlayer grid is it's not only adds strength, but it adds a waterproofer so that you restrict the cracks to the upper layer. The water hits the cracks, it goes down, and then it bleeds off at that layer instead of penetrating through. So it slows down the cracking and then helps keep the water from getting below. And then if you can keep the subgrade at a natural moisture instead of getting a saturated moisture, it won't pump nearly as much. So it's just a way to extend the design life. And we were talking, 10 years, it might have a 2.5 inch overlay. The leveling course doesn't really count as your amount that you added structurally. That layer reinforces what's on top. So if you had 2 inches, you might get 8-10 years out of it. But that'd be the first cracks. And so obviously the overlay system they had lasted about 15 years. But it's at the point now where you're deciding, well, do we have to do something? When are we going to start doing the maintenance? You watch it more often. So just your maintenance program becomes much, much more important at that point. I did have another slide. I don't know, Chuck, if you wanted to. It was just kind of to point out, it's the trucks that control your design. When we have a car, like when you look right here, the next one there, Jeff, is this is out of it's called equivalency factors. Basically, when they came up with these programs to design it, it was all based on trucks. They found out the trucks control the damage, and that's why you have scales on the highway. They restrict it. They really restrict it because of the damage. A normal axle, a normal dual-wheeled axle as you see on a truck, when it's fully loaded and it's at its design limit, is called 18 kips. A kip is 1,000 pounds. So it's 18,000 pounds. So it has an equivalent factor of 1. It does a damage of 1. A truck might be, a F-250, maybe 4,000 pounds on each axle when you get some weight in the back. We're looking at you look down the column. Structural number 3 would be kind of the streets that we have. So you go down there at 4 kips, that's 0.004. That's basically saying that F-250 is 2,000 of those equals 1 axle on a truck. So you can have a lot of cars, a lot of lightly loaded trucks, but the ones that are controlling it are your 18-wheel tractor trailers that are fully loaded, your triaxial dump trucks that are full of base stone or soil. That's, you see one of those running down, you got a back axle. There's 2 back axles. There might be a third triaxial, 2 axles up front, half an axle under the engine, so you might have 6 equivalent axles running on that truck, that's the same as 12,000 cars.
Which
Or
is why
si-
it's good to have more axles on trash trucks on your residential streets than single axle
Right.
trucks.
And then, yeah, for example, like when you have that single axle and it's fully loaded, so instead of being 18,000 pounds, we're at 24,000 pounds. So if you look at the 24,000 kip column and you go over to the structural number 3, that's a 3.09. So that one trash truck that was at its normal weight, not exceeding design weight, that's the same as 3 of these trash trucks that are overweight. And that's kind of, I think that's the, and I think Chuck and Joe and I, we talked that kind of the one thing that the trash truck, single axle, very heavily loaded, that's kind of what was doing a lot of the damage to the pavements. And it was one of the reasons why a lot of these we went with concrete streets to help span that stress on the soil. But again, the trucks drive everything, and having trucks under normal loads is something that is good. And it even brings back to even fully going back, 30, 40 years. One thing, like the alleys. When I was growing up, my grandpa's house, they got an alley. What's the alley for? It was for the utilities. It was also for the trucks, the trash trucks to run, because you could run heavy. You rut. Okay, no problem. We're not driving. We protect the streets, and obviously that's another discussion. I understand we're committed to on the streets, but that's one of the reasons why the alleys existed in the old days. That was a way that you didn't have to maintain as much as you do on the.
Then wear out your streets.
And I'm sure that the people that did this may not have realized this, but they knew from experience. I'm tearing up my streets, and they chose to go into the alley mode and let's start doing the utilities there instead of in front where we paved or concreted.
Okay, so what we want to talk with you about tonight is to kind of present, you've got a cafeteria approach here, if you will, on different construction techniques. And this was important because when we talk about actually how we would go about paying for something, it really limits what options that we've got. Okay, so we've got general obligation bond rolling off of the tax rolls. At some point in time this year, if we want to continue the levy that we've been graciously provided by the taxpayers, we have to make a decision this year on whether or not we're going to roll that out. Otherwise, that levy will lapse, and then it's difficult then to state that it's not a new burden, it's not a replacement of an existing burden. It would be then a new burden at that point. So traditionally, that has produced about $2 million something for you, given whatever your assessed value is. And for a long time, we thought that was driven by state law, but it's not. State law was changed some time back that allows you to allow the taxpayer to vote on whatever they want. But in Miami, our charter limits us to 5% of our assessed value. So what that's done is that our predecessors have found the sweet spot, if you will, that's about $2 million something on a 10-year note. Because since you're limited to the principal amount, stretching it out longer would increase the term of the bond, but would decrease the debt service, but you can't increase the principal. You could go shorter, which would increase the amount that's paid, but still, again, couldn't affect the principal. But now if you look at some of these options, like for example, number 2. No, I don't want number 2, I want number 4. Number 4, for example, is a complete reconstruction with a concrete street. It gives you an expected life expectancy of that road of 30 years. So you do that road, and none of us in this room are going to do that road again. We're done with that road for the remainder of our productive lives. So If you then put that on a 20-year bond issue, I'm smiling. I'm making some generous assumptions. I know. I apologize.
Yeah.
I don't think any of us will be here when we're 80s. So, I mean, at this, in this role,
Tyler might be here.
Tyler might have to do this road again. He plays his cards right. So, you could effectively take the equivalent of the 2 million 10-year on a $4 million 20-year note, would be similar effect from a levy standpoint, and then get 10 more additional years out of that. Whereas if we go 2 million on a 10-year note, then we're going to get 10 years out of the majority of the road, but still get 30 years out of the intersection. So we're probably going to turn around and pay off that bond and immediately be right back in the situation of having to replace that. So I know that you have been actively examining the possibilities of doing some charter revisions, since I also notice in our charter that we're authorized by our charter to levy a property tax every year, but I think state law would preclude us from doing that. There's just lots of things that are in the charter that are interesting. You could give the taxpayers the option of deciding whether or not they want to pay for 20 years for a 30-year road. But you'd have to wait until you were done with your charter revisions to do that. So that's why we asked for this cafeteria approach, so that you could look and pick and choose different options. You could look at, for example, options 2 and 3 and put that before the voters on a renewal of the existing GO bond for the roughly $2 million, give or take a few thousand here and there. That would effectively give you a product that would last the duration of the bond issue. Plus, you're going to get the added benefit at the intersections. You can wait, or you can choose one of the other options. Or you can choose to go with a hybrid approach where you blend other sources of revenue in with the GO bond. In other words, put it before the voters and say, if you approve this GO bond, we will match it with X number of dollars from either the city's budget or some other existing revenue source. One option that we kicked around was, as we're getting ready to issue this revenue bond for water, sewer, and the possibility of AMI, we could include a little extra in that to match a GO bond issue that the voters would have a chance to take a look at. And in that scenario, you could offer the taxpayer a 30-year street with a 10-year debt for the majority of it, and longer term for a section of it. So you really have kind of a build your own plan here. I mean, you can kind of hunt and peck these different options and try and find something that you think would be attractive.
So, I was a little confused about when you talked about the charter part. Would you, are you suggesting that if we went the almost $4 million route, what we're in effect is asking the citizens to change the charter?
Well, no, you're asking, I would submit to you that you're going to ask the citizens to change the charter, to update the charter, because it's antiquated, and you're looking at a comprehensive overview of the charter anyway.
Right.
But the last consideration that you had for that was looking at keeping the structure that you have now for electing council and members of the council, but then pretty much then adopting the statutory form of government for the council manager otherwise. Then relying on the predictability of the fact that there's so many other communities in the state that are operating under the exact same rules, and there's going to be much more case law, there's going to be more attorney general's opinions. You're going to have greater predictability about what you can and can't do and what the consequences are. One of the problems with your charter now is that it's so old and antiquated that you have problems really trying to figure out exactly what the framers intended, because it's a bit ambiguous in places. Other places
Contradictory.
it's been preempted, so on and so forth. But assuming that's the case, the legislature has wrestled with this issue of what's authorized for the debt, and the legislature has basically determined that the taxpayer is intelligent enough to figure out how much debt they want on their own. Since you have to have it approved by the voter is astute enough to know that if they want to afford this, they vote for it. If they don't, then they vote no. Some of the old prevailing thoughts was that folks weren't smart enough to figure that out, so they needed a cap imposed so that they didn't get asked that question. So the legislature has already considered this and passed changes to the law that allows the taxpayer more choice. So that's a much more drawn-out process. You have to wait. Now, if you think you're going to get that accomplished before the end of this year, then that may be an option that you want to hold off on making this decision until this fall, until after you've had an opportunity to see if that process is going to come to fruition or not.
What's the difference between 2 and 3, besides the additional, I guess the primary difference between 2 and 3 and 4 is 4 is concrete all the way?
Plus
Is there-
base. I mean, you're digging it
Plus
up,
the
you're
base.
replacing the base, you're building a 30-year road all the way
Yeah,
through.
basically, the only difference between 2 and 4 is 2 is in smaller areas, just the intersections, the turn. If we did 2 for the whole length, 2
If
and
you,
4 would be pretty
if
much
you
the same.
ignore inflation, okay, and you took 2 and 3 and understood that you'd have to do 3 twice. You'd have to do it today and you'd have to do it 15 years from now.
Okay.
Okay, you're at about $3 million. That's ignoring inflation. And you're getting 30 years either way.
Right. I guess the one thing, if you probably couldn't do 3 twice. When Joe did that 15 years ago, the asphalt were probably a little bit stronger. There used to be what was called lime stabilized soil underneath. It may have been there 15 years ago. We couldn't find it. We found it in one of the borings. It was still a little bit cement. In the next 10 years, that asphalt's probably going to get tore up beyond being replaced, and so we're not going to be able to do a second.
So what
overlay.
you're really telling me then is, if we did 2 and 3 as a combination, that 15 years from now, we're probably looking at a complete rebuild?
Yes.
Is that,
For
is that
3.
overstating it?
Yes.
And the
Yes,
time,
it's-
Yes, that would be the simplified version, yes.
That'd be
2 would last,
accurate.
that 3 would last 15 years, or however long we could get it to last, and then we have to take that out and replace it.
and from a time value of money standpoint, you could probably almost assume it will be more expensive on a unit basis at that time than it is now.
The only thing you wouldn't have is you wouldn't have to redo the
The
concreted areas,
concrete area.
but you're still gonna have to.
Basically, 2 and 3 is a cash flow. If you don't have the cash right now, that's a way to be able to have cash flow to pay that. And that's just like what Jeff was talking about, the bonds. If you get the money now, it makes sense to do the reconstruction, that, you know, you're getting the benefit for it. But if you don't have the cash flow,
John,
the
did you
2
do
and
it?
3 gives you that option.
Did you do an estimate for reconstruct last year?
We may have done,
We did one, but our design was 6 inches and we used 8 inches as the number of trucks.
Has there been any change in that number in the year that you, I mean,
as far
proportionately?
as the
Yeah, have you had
rates.
any escalation since then?
I did notice that when you got from Blevins and Swift, and then when we got the bids this last phase 3, there are some changes. I mean, you can see some areas have increased just because of whether it's labor costs or material costs. There's slight increases. So to answer your question, yes, there is some inflation.
So just in the year that we've been considering this, the costs have gone up
Right,
an increment of some sort.
right. You can see it especially in the selected bids. When you look at everything in the whole, there's different ways different people do it. So, but when you look at the whole and you're looking at key ones, you can see some people have slightly increased their costs.
Well, I mean, my I was kind of leaning towards 2 and 3, thinking that you could just redo number 3 later, and you're spending less money overall, and you're still getting 30 years. But you're saying that you can't redo 3 for the same amount. It's gonna cost you some number more, maybe twice as much would be a stretch. And that's, I guess, why you were asking about the rebuild
Yes, sir.
estimate from last year, to maybe get a sense of that, but,
You would do the 2 and 3 if it was cash flow. I don't have enough cash, so you have to be able to buy time. That would be the best decision then. If you had the cash, then you would want to do 4, or maybe even, like Jeff was saying, do I need, if this is going to be, can we get all the traffic a lot more on the 69A? So, Joe said that they live right on that truck route and they see quite a bit less, but if there was a means to get a little bit more traffic, and this could become more of a quasi-residential street, and you don't have the lighted intersections, it could be less dollars in it all the way. But as long as the trucks stay, that's what's going to drive the thickness required and the amount of effort.
so did we find out?
We haven't been able
to.
to, it predates everybody, and we've been scouring the files to see if there's some kind of an agreement on the truck route.
We've even asked ODOT, and they're looking, but they haven't
So,
been able to find
yeah,
any
we're not-
information.
We're not sure, but to that effect, I mean, A's are already, I mean, if you look at A southbound, we're already, when the overlay was done, what, 5 years ago? It's breaking up really bad now. So, I'm not sure that A's are that well built that they would be able to handle truck route. Now theoretically, the state would be on the hook for upgrading those, but, we would be competing with other projects to get that money. And if, and I'm gonna get to another thought here in just a second, but I think, if you had your choice between D and A as a truck, D gets you further north than A would before you have to stop and get on to another thoroughfare. But we really think we see more trucks moving and migrating to 69A rather than coming down Steve Owens and then going up D. Now, we still see quite a bit of truck traffic, and, counts could tell us that, but
What,
but,
69A is what?
that's the road out by Buffalo Run.
Okay, yeah.
Um,
I think the part of the challenge there is, for example, they're not supposed to come across veterans.
Right.
They do. They're not supposed to. We have an ordinance.
But if you're driving through to get to Commerce or someplace like that, you can continue on.
Right.
Or if you're going to
Right.
Baxter or wherever. So I don't know how much through traffic you have now on D versus how much of it's local traffic.
Have we done a study recently on the
That's what I
traffic?
was gonna say. We probably need to.
We done
I
a
would
traffic
think we
count on
need to do
D
that.
recently?
This data has numbers we looked at previously.
On D? It's not a difficult thing to do.
I think I'd like to look at it for a month.
Okay?
I mean, anecdotally, every time I'm there, it seems like I see a truck, but.
One thing,
and-
just on the note on the traffic counts, I think they were done when they did their portion. I don't know if they've done it in the last year or two. You just want to, have a spot check it just to validate that it's still.
I want to make sure that I'm not missing an important point that you were trying to make when you showed your scale up there where 18 is equal to 1, basically, to normalize things. Were you trying to say, because we're talking about truck traffic,
Right.
and we're saying, well, what if we find out there's only 2 trucks? Are you really saying that even if there's only 2, it really, really, really matters that there's a truck,
Well,
period?
If the trucks are half of what they, let's say the trucks 2 years ago were double what they are now, and they're projected to be about half, then the pavement could be a little bit thinner. It may be another inch thinner on the concrete, or 2 inches, or another inch on the asphalt, or a little bit less on the base stone. Or the pavement stays the same and your design life goes longer.
Lengthens.
Explain that again, will you? The 18, you said the
Well,
18?
Yeah, everything's designed off of the truck with an 18,000 pound axle. So that'd be like if you had a FedEx truck and the ground truck and it was just loaded with heavy boxes, not
The
boxes.
gross
with
weight's
gross
18,000.
weight. Then when you said, hey, what damage does it do? It does a damage of 1. And then I have these trucks, these F-250s or F-150s running. It may take 1,000 F-150s to go over the same spot and cause some damage as it would be one truck with an 18,000 pound axle. It has to do with the weight, the impact. It's not the number of times. It's basically the way these pavements are designed is kind of like a spring. You know, like you take a paper clip and you do it enough, it'll break. That's how concrete's designed. And then asphalt's a little bit like this, but a little less sensitive. It's more sensitive to the spring. So the fact that you have a heavy impact causing that as opposed to these light ones from like a passenger, Nissan car or F-150, they just don't have the impact that the trucks do. And you especially see it on a bridge. You ever see a bridge and a truck gets on it, sometimes if you're on the bridge, you can even feel the impact. With the cars, you don't feel anything. But that'll happen on every joint on the truck route or any route, and any crack, it has the same effect. So it's just that those minor, those repetitive cycles, and the trucks just have a lot more impact on the cycles. So when you look at equivalencies, we can count the number of cars, but it's almost always the number of trucks that drives the design.
Is anybody else leaning any particular way? I mean, Joe and I have expressed a desire to see some numbers that might affect us. Is a month going to make a big difference?
Oh, no, sir. Not at all. In fact, we've had some internal discussions about doing a traffic study on it to determine whether or not we need that many lights on D as it is. So we could probably knock that out at the same time.
Okay.
I don't know if we can get a traffic study done in a month. How long does it normally take, Tyler?
Are we gonna do it in-house?
Unless we can talk ODOT into doing it. I mean, it's too bad we didn't
Yeah.
include them when they were just here doing the.
Yeah. I would suggest to do it preliminarily in-house. I mean, ODOT would require a lot more thorough, especially with the traffic control manual. But if you went through the basics, we could help them do it's called warrants.
Right.
There's about 10 warrants.
What's your study period? What do you need?
Well, we would probably modify it to do maybe a couple times during the day, and at night, and just kind of pick what we think are representative times so that we can get some data and run those and be able to show ODOT or someone else, like, hey, we think this is what it is. If they accept it, they accept it. If they want to do it, okay, well, we're asking you to do the study. Because the study they would do would be counts. They might even have a traffic counter, and it just picks it up, and they're just counting.
Now,
Whereas we would do it by hand. I think that would be the way to.
the ODOT nexus is because this is functionally classified, or it's because it's not a state road?
Well, if they had any money involved, they would want to do it their method, which would be
Right.
a traffic study.
But the likelihood of us getting ODOT money involved in this project is probably.
Right. So in that case,
Small.
I think not doing you could do the full thing, but I think you would get the answers you would want in a selected time in the morning, evening traffic, and maybe mid-morning, mid-afternoon. That might be and if we thought there was some evening traffic sometime, somebody could count then, and maybe you could use somebody in Public Works that's already on light duty or something, and that could be something they do so you get productive use out of it.
So yes, sir, 1 month we can bring something back to you.
Okay. So maybe we would try to shoot for this planning meeting next month to talk about it if
We
possible.
can, in fact, we can bring both of these subjects tonight back to you as your next workshop with more refined information.
Okay. Any other questions or thoughts or comments on anything they've shown us? Was there anything else that I didn't let you get to?
No, that was
Okay,
it.
thank you. Item number 6, discuss employee health care plan strategies for the next fiscal year. Jeff, I know you and I had just a preliminary conversation about this, and y'all have a plan already that you'd like to recommend to us? I mean, a plan to follow to get to a decision.
Yes, sir. If I may, because time
Sure.
is running long
Sure.
tonight, what we would like to recommend to you is because we've got a new I don't want to call them player because they've been here, but because we have a local company that's been acquired by the Gallagher Group, we have access to a broader array of personnel services, including health insurance, including third-party administration of our self-insured health coverage. These are things we've not had available locally before. And they have submitted a proposal to you, which we've shared with you. Staff has been kind of kicking around what's the process forward and trying to come up with a process so that you can consider this. And our recommendation to you is that you schedule 2 meetings. One of them could be at one of your regularly scheduled meeting and another meeting on the day before or day after, and have both our existing provider and then Gallagher come in and make presentations to you and allow you to evaluate those presentations and decide whether or not you want to go through a formal process to consider whether it's appropriate for you to consider other options over and above what we've been traditionally doing.
And just so you'll know, I know it's a lot of time that we're asking for, but I recommended to Jeff that we do it sequentially in 2 nights, just because you get into this stuff, and if you sleep, for a week or 2, you just can't
Right.
retain it all. And so it's important to try to do it
And
close
just,
together.
yeah, in putting things in perspective, this is one of our largest expenses, health benefits, and probably going to be one of the most contentious issues in the future, given all the changes that are going on in the industry. So we had the conversation earlier today. We're not sure exactly when the last time was we competitively looked at alternatives to the current provider.
It's never happened in 7 years that I've been on the council. I mean, it's definitely time.
So we think it's appropriate for there to be some due diligence to that effect. And no one should interpret that to be any kind of a perspective on the service that we're getting now. It's just simply something that we in government need to do from time to time and ask questions.
Well, personally, I've used the same TPA the city's used, and they've always done a great job. But with the new Health Care Act and all, it's incumbent on us to take a fresh look, and for the council
Right.
to be involved in that process as we look anew.
I have some packets I'll give each of you. One of them is Gallagher's proposal, and then inside I've put our service agreement with Benefit Management,
Okay.
which is our current TPA, so you can kind of see.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kim.
So, is that all on that?
That's all tonight.
Madam Jeff,
We
okay.
will be reaching out to you to check your availability.
Okay, thank you. Item 7, other new business.
Your Honor, we did possibly have an item of new business for you
Okay.
tonight. The city attorney learned today, and I think he's up reviewing it now, but a lawsuit was filed against the city today.
Okay.
And I think he wanted to brief you, and it was his opinion that it was permissible to do that in executive session. So if we could have a 3-minute recess so we can go locate the city attorney
Okay.
and see if he's still of a mind to want to do that with you tonight.
Okay, we're going to take a quick break while we locate David. But I wanted you guys to watch the video again because Amanda, I don't remember her last name, wants to come back again. And my initial reaction was, why? Here we go. Okay. We're going to go back to item number 4 for just a minute. I just want to ask all the council to take an opportunity to re-look at the video from last time. The young lady that spoke to us before would like to speak to us again. I need to determine whether or not that will be an agenda item on the next SUA meeting. And so I would appreciate if y'all would review that. Now back to item 8. Mayor and council community announcements. Are there any announcements for the community? Okay. Item number 9, future agenda planning. Anything under future agenda planning? We've done some of that conversation already tonight. None. Item number 10, do we have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
And do we have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Roll call. I'm sorry. All in favor.
McLean?